Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sandy Quinn, president of the Richard Nixon Foundation. Welcome. I want you to please stand and greet some of America's greatest heroes, beginning with Commander Everett Alvarez. Colonel Paul Galanti. Captain John McGrath. Lieutenant Colonel Tom Hampton. Dr. Roger Shields. And Frank Luntz from Fox News.
There we go. I guess we're right. Does this mean something to you? You know, you get this reaction. I've come here every time I'm like this. It's a full house, and you always get. And yes, the other day.
Thank you. Thank you. President Nixon called them men of steel. And you can add to that all kinds of words like great heroes, great patriots, men of sacrifice, of incredible loyalty. Thank you for coming and participating. A couple of special guests that I'd like to introduce. One is a man who used to live across the street from me in Nichols Canyon, and I had a voting place in my garage. He would come across the street and vote one way. I would step in right after him and cancel his vote and vote Republican. Richard Dreyfuss, ladies and gentlemen. For years and years, one of the great, he was a POW. He was a prisoner of work in the entertainment industry. Now, Ed Nixon is here somewhere, but I'm not sure just where, but he is around, so thank you, Ed, the president's brother, for coming. I want to tell you just a little bit about what brought all of these fellas to Yorba Linda. Over the last week, we have had the 40th anniversary reunion of the White House dinner that was held May 24th, 1973, hosted by President and Mrs. Nixon, shortly after the POWs returned from Vietnam. They were returned from camps all over Vietnam. The most famous, I guess, was the Hanoi Hilton, where Brother Alvarez spent 8.5 years. And there was one called the Zoo, and they were all over the place. You're going to hear a little bit about that in a moment. But when we heard that they were having their reunion, perhaps their last, we got together with them. Tom Hanton is the president of the Vietnam POW group, and Everett Alvarez is on our foundation board of directors, and we said, let's have it here. So have it here we did. And it began on Thursday with a kind of hometown Norman Rockwell greeting with a motorcade of 10 buses coming down the freeways and Yorba Linda Boulevard with the folks of the neighborhoods and the kids gathered on the street waving flags, welcoming them. When they came here, there were 100 Patriot riders to escort them, fire engines, the Villa Park High School band, our great docent guild, the red carpet, American flags everywhere, and they came in with more press than I've seen here since probably the grand opening. And that day we did a military ceremony with a 21-gun salute, wreath laying to President Nixon. We had the president's daughter, Tricia, here. We had the military presentation of the colors. We had a Marine band, and we capped it all off with a old-fashioned American barbecue in our parking lot with Tony Orlando walking around singing Yellow Ribbon and all of his favorites. Great day. Yesterday was the 40th anniversary of the dinner. And we did it here in the White House East Room at the Richard Nixon Presidential Library in Yorba Linda. And this room was packed with POWs in black tie, and their spouses all dressed up, a number of widows, a number of the Nixon family, including Tricia and the daughter, and we had Ross Perot as the keynote speaker. We had tapes from some of the POWs who couldn't come. Emotional those were. We had a tape from Dr. Henry Kissinger, who was instrumental working with President Nixon and bringing them home. And it was, I thought, a glorious evening. And one of the features was a recreation of the event that took place in the White House at that very dinner, where the POWs, 35 of them, got up and sang a song that was written by Colonel Quincy Collins, a POW, while in captivity. Emotional, moving song that we played just as it was in or we played it from the White House tapes. And President Nixon jumped on the stage and thanked them. And afterwards I said, are there any of those chorus members here? And a lot of them stood up, and so we got them up here, we lined them up right here, and they sang that song again. And I don't think there was a dry eye in the place. A wonderful evening, and Ross Perot's remarks were terrific as well. So that gives you a little of the context of why they're here. Now, what we're going to do today is talk about the experiences and what was going on in the White House to achieve negotiations that would result in a settlement of the Vietnam War and a release of the POWs. That was any of those negotiations in President Nixon's eyes were contingent upon a full unconditional agreement that these fellows would return home and that there'd be a full accounting for the MIAs. So to kind of set the tone for this, because we're going to talk not only the captivity, but the homecoming and the celebratory mood of the country in that. So I've asked our good friend, the famous Fox commentator and pollster, Frank Luntz, to kind of open and give you a little sort of tone setter. Frank Luntz, please.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
First, I have to ask your indulgence. Yesterday when I arrived here, it took me an hour of conversations with these men before I could keep my voice at a constant level. And I do not guarantee that at some point in these next hour, hour and a half, that I won't at some point become emotional, because the stories are just so powerful. In the audience, are any of you in your teens or 20s? Raise your hands. If they ever say that there are no heroes left anymore, you're looking at heroes right up in front of you. But it is not just them. Those of you who have served in the military in our audience now, please stand, and everyone please recognize them. If I can take you back to 1973, the homecoming for our POWs was very powerful. But for many people who wore the uniform in 1973, they didn't get the appreciation that you see today. And that there are those who have spent 40 years wondering what happened to our country. In some ways today we are stronger than we were back then. If you see a man or woman in uniform, they can't walk more than 5-10 minutes without somebody coming up to say thank you. And that's a good change for this country. Back in 1973, if you wore the uniform, you didn't know what kind of reaction you were going to get. And I think that there are many Americans who feel like they made a mistake back then, and they're trying to make up for it today. The challenge now is whether we still are as united a country, and whether we still believe in the values and the convictions that made these men so strong. But you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from them. I'd like each of you to take 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm going to use you, Commander, as to negotiate with them, because they certainly won't listen to me the first. And is there a story, a moment, a reflection? Because today is going to be a morning of storytelling. Stories that I hope you will write down, and stories that I hope you will remember. Of all your experiences, what stood out most?
Well, I was the chosen one to be the first shot down over in the Vietnam War in North Vietnam. I was shot down August 1964, which was later became known as the Tonkin Gulf incident. That several days there, and as you may remember, that was the event that Congress passed the resolution which enabled President Johnson to start building up our forces in the south of Vietnam. I was fortunate enough to make it through my shoot down with minor injuries, and a week later I wound up as the first guest of the Wallow prison in Hanoi, which we later nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton.
Did you ever ask Hilton how they felt about that?
I had the opportunity to meet Conrad Hilton after, and I talked to him about this. And I used to tell the others that, I said, you guys, if you want to get a good room, you have to come early. Being the first one and having been in that captive for 8.5 years, I was able to sort of have a grandstand seat in terms of all the events went from the beginning to the end and everything that happened in between. I was there by myself for actually 6 months, and then the war really started up, and then the next POW was shot down, Admiral Shoemaker, and then followed by Air Force Captain Hayden Lockhart, who is not here, but was here at the reunion, and then others started joining us, but I was actually by myself for about 13 months and 8 days, and I used to remember the hours before I had a cellmate, and so it was an interesting experience. Things got a little tough about a year after I was arrived, and physically they started to treat us quite badly. Some of the sketches that are in Mike's book are pretty, can depict pretty much the conditions, what have you. And then gradually after 1969, after Ho Chi Minh died, and after I believe that during the Paris peace talks that the Vietnamese government recognized that whatever happened as an outcome, we were going to be a very important element of ending the war, and so they started to treat us quite gradually. They've improved the treatment, and towards the end, they couldn't do enough to keep us. But the homecoming is just it was a great event, great story, and of course the reception by the president and the country. It was overwhelming, and I will say that coming out, the one thing that I did not expect was a positive response of the American people towards us. And I look at the as you mentioned, Frank, the treatment and the reception that the guys that went over there over all the years, and we were, looked upon as the guys with the black hats, the Vietnam veterans and what have you. But then when we came along, I think they were looking for a good story, and in retrospect, I think that the experience was a good story, a positive story. But coming home and becoming instant celebrities in a way was overwhelming. And what's really overwhelming? It's still 40 years later. Look at how we're treated and how and I appreciate that. We all thank you very much for that.
And we're going to come back to a number of those specific points in a moment. Commander, do you remember how many days you were in captivity?
Yeah, I was captured in June of 1966, 22 months after Ev was shot down, and I stayed 2,432 days, 6 years and 8 months, and a number of hours as a prisoner of war. The difference, everybody has something different up here. I spent, every time I started solitary confinement, I was solitary about a year, and when I started feeling sorry for myself, I used to think about Ev Alvarez, who'd been shot down the day I got orders to fly the same airplane. And I'd finished up my tour as an instructor in the Flight Training Command. I went through all the training in the A4, went overseas, flew 97 missions, then got shot down. I kept thinking, all that time that I was doing all that flying, he'd been a POW. So every time I felt sorry for myself, I thought about Ev. He's been through this for much longer than Bob Shoemaker, and so I don't really have anything to complain about. The other thing is I happened to be on the cover of Life magazine, and they forced me in this position. They said, you must talk to him, and he's German. And I speak German. I'm going to tell him about all the torture and bad treatment. Oh, you cannot say anything. If they don't talk to you, you don't talk to them. And so I took this picture, and I stuck my middle fingers out just to make certain that if anybody saw it, I wanted to know I wasn't doing that voluntarily. Also, unbeknownst to me, it appeared on the cover of Life magazine. And so all my friends saw that knew something was up. When I came home, my wife and I had known each other for 6 years before we got married. So, we weren't strangers, although we'd only been married a couple years before I went overseas. In the interim, she had turned into very famous. She used to be real shy. She was going to be a good Navy wife, standing barefoot and pregnant on the pier, waving goodbye to Sir Galahad as he sailed over the horizon. And she was famous. She's in this museum, the Nixon Library, downstairs in the POW exhibit, sitting next to Sybil Stockdale's. In fact, she may have the biggest portrait in the thing as you walk in. And she was sitting next to Henry Kissinger. And 40 years ago at the dinner we replicated last night, Phyllis said to me, come here, I want you to meet somebody. And so we walked over, and there's this little short guy with curly hair. And she walked up and said, Dr. Kissinger, I'd like to meet you to meet my husband, Paul. And he looked up at me and said, your wife, she gave me so much trouble. So then we had 2 kids, and now 38 and 35, and we're living in Richmond, Virginia, where he settled. She settled. We're both Army brats, moved all over the world, and we have only moved. My boys don't know any house except the one we've lived in ever since. And I've had a whole slew of jobs. And Governor McDonald in Virginia ruined my perfectly happy retirement 2 years ago by making me the Commissioner of Veteran Services in Virginia. So I'm doing for Virginia whatever Alvarez did for the entire country 35 years ago. So, that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Now I know that if I ever extend my middle finger on Fox News, I'll use you as the... And I made a mistake here. Where are the wives, the spouses of people who served in the military? Are there any here? Please stand up and be recognized. Having spent some time yesterday talking to your spouses, the suffering was not just in Vietnam, it was right here at home. And I thank you, and I appreciate what you went through. You're the historian, Captain. You know the numbers more than anybody else. As you tell your story, can you put in perspective for them how many people were involved and what they went through?
Thank you, Frank. I did turn into a historian, not by choice, but I had all the facts and figures and was able to memorize things, and these guys won't let me go. They said, you know all the secrets, so they're keeping me. But Paul and I were classmates at the Naval Academy, and he was a year ahead of me there, and I said, anything that Paul Galanti's doing, it's got to be a good deal, so I better go down and find out what he's up to. And my wife was just a little bit mad. We're still married after 50 years, but I'm going to tell you quickly, if you want to be POWs, go home today, shut the garage door, live on the cement floor. For 6 years, we never had a pair of shoes, a pair of socks, a bed, an ice cube, an egg, a paper, a pencil, a Bible. We had nothing for 6 years. They wouldn't even let me have a stick to clean my fingernails, and that applies to all of us. They treated us like animals, and I'll tell you about the barbarity. Then 6 years later, you open the garage door and say, "Hi, honey, I'm home." My wife was just a little bit, I deserted her for 6 years, left her with 2 small kids. I came home, they were old enough to wrestle and fight and fish and ski. And we built the family, and we're still a strong family today, 40 years later. But I was the average age 27, and the average rank, and a lieutenant, and I had the average treatment. They basically tortured all of us, they broke us, they humiliated us. If you didn't die in torture, you broke. And if you didn't break, you died. And I drew our experience in this book of all my drawings. Here's a picture of the Vietnamese rope trick where they tied our arms behind us, rotated them over your shoulders till your shoulders dislocated, and that's how they broke us with the Vietnamese rope trick. So I drew all of our experiences in this book, which is in its 12th printing. So we were treated brutally. But in the end, we came home. Of the 662 that came out alive, 32 escaped, 330 of us were repatriated, and out of that, almost all of us, 90% of us, stayed in the military for a career, came back, served our country, and continued on for full military careers. Our loyalty was with our country, and we came back to serve with honor and dignity. That was our motto, return with honor. And then we were greeted by the Nixon White House, and the country just treated us wonderfully. Came back. I came to San Diego, and I'm very proud. Well, we're all proud of our service, and we're proud of our country that brought us back and welcomed us back. So that's kind of I'm the average guy, but we made it back.
With all due respect, you may have gone over as ordinary men, but you returned as extraordinary heroes. Lieutenant Colonel, you are now the head of this organization, but if you can go back in time, is there one moment that really stands out to you?
My first, as most of us, in my case, I was a short-time shoot-down, and while these guys were setting the standards, these key leaders and many others, I was up the road here in Seal Beach, going to Long Beach State, enjoying life in college here in sunny California, graduating in '67, went in the Air Force. So my first month was in solitaire. These guys spent years in it. In fact, many guys spent more time in solitaire than I did as a POW, so I consider them heroes. They consider me a hero, but that's another story. My first 10 days was when the most intense interrogation took place. In '72, they weren't doing the rope trick, thank God. When Nixon had won the election in '68, and I had the fortune of knowing where the federal government was going. So I was very confident, and I think because of all the reasons Ev mentioned, the North Vietnamese changed their posture on treating us. At any rate, I'm in the one of the interrogation rooms. They had so many of us captured. I wasn't in one of the little bitty tiny rooms, but I was in the same room they interrogated me, which was, I think, unusual. In that room was a speaker high on the wall, about a 20-foot ceiling. And some of our, I'll call them less patriotic citizens, were over in enemy territory, beating up on our country. And I got sick and tired of listening to this loudspeaker, particularly Jane Fonda. And I shimmied up the top of that. I shimmied up the wall and ripped out the speaker wires and almost fell down because it was a ways up. And then I'm in there, I'm thinking, uh-oh. First of all, no one knew that I was there. I was in the Hilton, the Hanoi Hilton. But I wasn't in the main part of the Hilton. I was in the right off the courtyard to the right, under the kitchen. Interesting smells from the kitchen. But most of the food that was cooked in the kitchen we didn't get. It was for the guards. At any rate, I thought, these guys are going to come in. You didn't know when they were going to come in. daytime, nighttime, anytime. And I'm thinking, what are they going to do when they don't hear the speaker? You know, just because you're in the prison system doesn't mean you're going to go out of the prison system. In fact, when I talk about my short time in the Hilton, when I first met John McCain's brother, and I said I was just there for a while, and he said, did they give you a card when you walked in the door saying you're going to get out on a certain day, or you're going to get out at all, Tom? And I said, no. But at any rate, I said, well, maybe I made my first mistake here, other than being shot down, of course. They never came in while the speaker was, or the camp radio was on, but we would get, every time the camp radio came on, it was either unpatriotic Americans or unpatriotic POWs that were willingly, not with the rope trick, but willingly disparaging our country, which did not stick very well with me. So I think, Frank, that was probably, I kind of set the vector for what I was going to do. And we all get through this experience on our own, and we can get into it later, but no matter whether you're there for 8.5 years, and every time I think of that number, I just shake my head, or 5 or 6 years that these guys were able to do it. And just as Paul said, oh, I kept thinking of Eb being there 8 years. Well, I have the same feeling. If those guys can do it for 6, 7 years, I can do it another day. I can do it another day. So you have to take things one day at a time. This is not much different than life. It's just a little more pressure. It's not something you would sign up to do. But overall, it's what I bring back from the experience. And in fact, being associated with these great guys, I mean, to be the president of the organization is a very humbling and it's a deep honor for me personally. And the respect we got from the American public when we came home, it was, well, for me it was embarrassing, to be honest with you, because I know all the guys. I was stationed in South Vietnam in the Air Force, Da Nang, the last fighter squadron there. Nixon was bringing everyone home when the North Vietnamese, realizing we were showing weakness, not Nixon, but the country, because we were withdrawing. Communists, that's the way these guys work. Why would they come down with their army in 1972 when they knew Nixon was pulling us out? Because they saw weakness and they wanted to further embarrass us. That was my take on it. I may be wrong, but I've studied communists long enough and I know how they think. At any rate, the guys that were the real heroes are the guys that are not here. The ones that are on that wall and the ones they haven't found, and the ones in Iraq, the ones in Afghanistan. You know, today's military, they're all heroes. And it's just an honor to be here. Thank you very much for your support.
Doctor, you were responsible for bringing them home. How early in the war did you realize, because obviously you came in '69, when the Nixon administration started, did they know what was going on with our POWs?
We never really knew what was going on with our prisoners or our missing until we received a list from Hanoi in January 27th, 1973. We were dealing with an enemy that had no regard for the Geneva Conventions, which they had signed, which applied, which required them to tell us who they were holding as prisoners. It required them to take as good care of these men as they took care of their own forces. That's in the Geneva Convention. It required them to inform us when they were aware of the fact that some of our men had perished, had died. They did none of those things. They were to allow people, international inspectors, to inspect their prison camps to see, I guess, to check the ropes to make sure that they were strong enough when they were torturing you, things like that. They did none of this. They were supposed to allow letters to be written and letters to be received and packages to be received. None of that was done. So we were flying, almost flying blind by our own intelligence, what we were able to ascertain, and that was very difficult. Because there were some circumstances in which we said, a wingman, for example, would say, this man died. No question about it. His plane got hit. There was a SAM that speared his aircraft. He's dead. turns up in prison the next day, not with even his hair singed. So we never knew what the situation was. Family members never knew what the situation was. Many families, many wives, many parents never knew whether they were wives or widows or parents of children who had perished, had no idea at all. And for some of them, the reality was grim. One wife saw a photograph of her husband who had been captured sitting on the ground with a young Vietnamese lady looking at a tear in his flight suit and looked like she was daubing some cotton or something on it. He was fine. He had survived his ejection. He was great. We were told years later that he had died in captivity shortly after that photograph was taken. So she lived for all that time believing that her husband was there. So we really didn't know. We didn't know until the end because it was a very callous enemy that had no regard for humanitarian concerns. That was one of our issues. The families of these men were magnificent, and I have to say the American public was too, because while many of them were opposed to the war, the one thing they were agreed on was that the men had to come home. And so they put a lot of pressure on those of us who were working on how to get them home and how they should be treated when they came home. It was difficult. There were people who worked with me in the Pentagon, and they were great Americans who thought, if we don't get this over with soon, we're going to go out there and eject and get into prison with them because it might be safer than being here in the United States. It was great to have people who were so concerned and who demanded that these men be treated the way they were supposed to be treated. It was a humanitarian issue, not treated by the other side in that way.
Doctor, thank you. So this is looking back. I now want you to go back to when it happened. How old were you the day you were captured?
I was 26.
How old were you?
26. 27.
25.
Go back to that moment. You have bailed out, ejected. What went through your mind? This is a really weird question to ask, but what went through your mind the moment that they captured you?
The moment I was captured. There are a couple of things that I, in looking back, think about it. But at the time, I remember as I ejected, and I was very fortunate to make it because I was flying very low and I was almost inverted when I ejected. I had no choice. Either if I stuck with the plane, there was no way, and I figured I had a chance. And thank God, luckily, my parachute popped open as I hit the water, just before I hit the water, so it was great. First thought I thought was, oh my God, what's my mom and my wife going to do? Second thought was, oh, I better get out of this and get my little raft out. But I was in the middle of, right off the shore, and ironically, I just, don't ask me why, but I said, it was roast beef night on the ship. And I said, I'm going to miss roast beef night. Honest to God. And that was just a fleeting thought, and then, of course, then they came out and they started, I tried to evade. You can't evade very much when you're trying to keep your head above water, and they're looking for you. And my parachute, I'm still dragging me, trying to drag me under and getting out of this gear and everything. But yeah, the first thought was, they're going to kill me. But my mom, my wife, my roast beef.
In that order?
Oh, definitely. No, yeah. Absolutely in that order.
So we've got a drawing behind you of that experience. Commander, the moment that you were captured, what did you think?
Well, I was in pretty bad shape, same as Ev. By the way, the three of us were all fine.
He still has.
That's one of the problems with being Italian, and also a pilot. We use our arms too much. I ejected also very low, very fast, probably 500 knots, almost 600 miles an hour. You're supposed to, the book says you're supposed to slow it down to about 200 and get the airplane perfectly level and set up straight and so forth. This airplane is rolling like crazy. I got hit in the engine. It blew out the hydraulic systems. Black smokes were pouring in, and it started rolling. So I wasn't sure exactly where I was, and so I ejected very fast. It ripped 3 panels out of the parachute. I looked up and saw 3. My first, by the way, we call it the Hanoi Skydiving Club. And, it's very unique. And anyway, I looked up, there's three panels missing, 3 pieces of blue missing out of the parachute sky. I felt a sting on my neck and crashed on the ground, just a big thump. But that sting on the neck, I got shot in the neck coming down. There were just tracers all over the place. Was captured almost immediately. That picture looks very similar to what it was. They weren't really happy about our being in their country. And you got the living daylights beat out of me, a rope tied to my neck, stripped down to my underwear, tied to a tree, and they lined up like a firing squadron. They're counting in Vietnamese, and the arm goes up, and I kept looking around at all these rifles pointed at me, wondering if I'd see the bullet that killed me. And the feeling I had right then, the only other time I had there wasn't really fear, but I just knew this could be the end of it. And the last time I'd felt like that was when I was standing at the aisle at Fort Monroe Chapel, waiting for my bride-to-be to come walking down. And so that was a fairly stressful situation.
If there's a divorce lawyer here, you're going to make some money. Before I go on, did you think that day that you weren't going to live to the next day?
Yeah, I did, because we just got an intelligence report that said if you can capture them, capture them. And that's what the Vietnamese command was telling the North Vietnamese army. So I wasn't worried about dying. I'd known during survival school we trained on getting beat up, and except we had Navy SEALs beating us up, and they're some pretty tough guys. So we trained for it. It went way beyond waterboarding, which is that's neutral compared to what we received. But I wasn't at that time particularly worried. Of course, I've always been an optimist. And there are those who say if you fly airplanes off aircraft carriers, you're a born optimist anyway.
Captain, what happened the moment that you were captured?
The moment I was captured, I didn't think anything. I was hurt seriously, spinning towards the ground. I got out, my left arm was severed in half, dislocated the shoulders here. That's why I have a John McCain arm. That's my John McCain arm. And we're the same airplane. And I was semi-conscious. Dislocated knee, my leg was out here like this, spinning at 500 miles an hour. My back was broken, my arm was broken, dislocated. En route to Hanoi, when I started thinking, they had me down by a river, and all the soldiers were taking turns holding my head and beating me and throwing rocks off my chest. I could hear the water. I said, I'm going to be in that water, dead, floating out to sea. Then I got to Hanoi and think, oh, I'm going to get some medical treatment. I'm trying to hold my broken arm. And then in the torture the next 2 weeks, they dislocated this shoulder, dislocated this elbow. So then for 1 month, I was without sleep. I went into delirium and dysentery and tens of thousands of mosquito bites on me, and I thought I was going to die. That's when I started thinking clearly. I wonder if I'm going to get out of this mess alive.
Lieutenant Colonel?
I want to step back to one of your first question to me earlier, and I want to clarify a couple of things. One is the NAM-POWs is a non-political organization. I'm not speaking for the organization. I'm speaking for Tom Hanton and my beliefs, number one. Number two, I may have said some disparaging comments about some of our fellow citizens. What I'm saying is I will defend to their death their right to speak anything they want. My issue was going to the enemy camp and doing it. So, you can disagree with our government, and that's one of our rights. So I defend that. So I just wanted to clarify that. I should have. Whenever I give a speech, I always put that out front. So that's where. I was in a little faster airplane than these guys. They were all in those Tinker Toy airplanes. And I'm the only Air Force guy up here, too. I'm kind of outnumbered by Navy guys and some boat school guys. At any rate, that's what we call it, Navy Academy guys, boat school boys. At any rate, I was in an F-4, shot down in the end of June 1972 on my 135th mission in 5 months, so I was doing a lot of flying. But as I mentioned earlier, the North Vietnamese had come down and we had a lot of targets, so it was a target-rich environment, as we say. Our target that day was Hanoi. There was a truck park 6 miles south, and we were escorting. We were the fighters. We were there to prevent enemy fighters from shooting down the guys that were dropping the bombs. And on our way out, that particular day, we lost 5 F-4s. There was only about, the historian probably has better numbers than this, but there was only several days, and I'm not talking about linebacker when we lost, linebacker 2 when we lost B-52s. Because one B-52 with the number of people in that airplane is almost a fighter squadron in some single-seat airplanes. At any rate, the point was, up to that time, there was only 3 or 4 days in that entire war where they lost that many airplanes. And we were on the morning go, and I think we lost 3 or 4 airplanes, 5 by the time we were shot down. I think they were all lost in the morning. We were on after our mission, we were redirected to search and rescue because they'd lost all these guys and they'd come up on the radios and they'd send in the forces. And we had all of our weapons, our air-to-air missiles and our fuel. So we were primed to go back in and support the rescue forces. Well, I won't give you all the details, but in the context of that, we got shot down and we were 80 miles west of Hanoi. Similar to the airplane out of control, what Paul said, you'll have a missile blow up in your engine, it's pretty much takes out the flight controls and you're gonna get out. We were at 20,000 feet, so departing, because we were almost out of fuel, departing the country, so we couldn't max perform the airplane because we were gonna run out of gas before we got to Laos. That was, Thailand was our closest divert base if you didn't get any tanker fuel. So we have to keep a certain amount of fuel or you're going to bail out over enemy country. So anyway, we were slow. Anyway, the thing that hit me the most was, am I going to live? I didn't know, but I was determined that I was going to live. And I knew that as long as I wasn't injured, I would survive, and it was going to be one day at a time, and I did. I was very fortunate.
One more. Momentarily, we're going to go to the part of the story that brings a smile to everyone's face when you returned home. But I want to ask you about the role of faith, about the system of communication, how you were able to talk to each other, and how you were able to survive. And I'll let each of you, in whatever order you want to go, what was the most important element in your life that got you through those months and those years, and how did it keep you alive?
Well, I can start if you want. Spirituality was a very important part of the day-to-day survival from my perspective. Our faith in our fellow Americans, our faith in our country, and our faith in God. It certainly was an important part for me. And this was exemplified, I think, throughout the years by we used to have, and everything had to be done very covertly because we were not allowed to be heard outside the cells. But I do, every Sunday morning, the senior officer in the camp would send out the signal. And at that point, we all in our cells, whether we were solitary or a group or what have you, would stand and quietly, but we'd say the Lord's Prayer because we knew everybody was saying it at that time. And then at the conclusion of that, we'd turn, we'd face east, put our hands over our hearts and say the Pledge of Allegiance. That was something that was something that we never failed to do, no matter what the situation. And from the very first, we, after a few of us were there was one individual who came in who'd had some training in case something like that happened. And he knew the basics of what was the TAP code, and then taught the rest of us. And that's when, as Paul, uses it I think very articulately. It's just a matter of tapping on the wall, and you can get into it, Paul. But the bottom line is that it was a way to communicate between cells in those early days by tapping on the walls very silently, and you had to do it silently because if you were heard, it would break.
These are the illustrations in the book that you have.
It was a violation of the camp commander's rules, and the camp commander, when you broke and violated the rules, he tended to become very angry, and so that if you did violate it, he caught you, and then you were severely punished. And so that's an example how we had to do it. But that code, that way of communicating was our lifeline. It was our lifeline between each other, and it was to keep us together as a unity, as a group, as a cohesive military organization. Very essential. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, you do the TAP code, you picture a matrix 5 by 5. And across the top, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. We skip the K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So A is first row, first column, and it's tapped. B is first row, second column, and it's tapped. And then you go down one, F would be second row, first column, and is tapped. And so the tap, typically at night we'd say GN, GB, good night, God bless, to the room next door, and it'd be and you could get, so you tap pretty fast, not like Morse code or anything. Later, we could see people outside. We developed a derivation of then politically incorrectly was called the deaf-mute code back then, but it was much faster. If you could see somebody, you could tap A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. And our reunions like this, sometimes across the room, if it's really crowded, you go like this to get the guy's attention across the room and start tapping. And the only problem is we had to worry about getting caught by the guards in Hanoi. We have to worry about our wives because they think we're talking about them.
What kept you alive?
Well, the communication organization of the chain of command, the communication is the lifeline of keeping alive. If somebody knows you're alive, even if you die, they're going to get out and tell your wife about you. And so it's communication. So here it is. And then when he understands it, so you get halfway through a word. Pretty soon you have today is TD, tomorrow is TM, TT is that, T is the, and by golly, we invented texting and we didn't even know it.
There's not much to add to that, but the organization, faith in yourself is one thing you're going to say, I'm going to do it. Persistence and, just don't give up. Those are, I'll add those two. And the other one is humor, in case you didn't get that common. Military is military, and even in the grimmest, and we could go through, I'm sure, 1,000 stories here, and we'll be serving us breakfast tomorrow morning on some of these humorous stories. And that was one of the things that gets me through, or got me through. Gets me through now, as a matter of fact. Sometimes it's hard to take me seriously because they don't know whether I'm serious or not. But I was serious over there, and my wife is an author, and she gives a lot of author talks to schools because that's her venue. And when I can, well now I can't always. I'm retired, but I go with her, and she always wants me to speak the kinds of things that we learn. It's what, like I said earlier, what we brought home. And the one thing I always talk to and the teachers get it immediately. I was either I was either the teacher's pet or their worst nightmare. I was the worst nightmare to the Vietnamese, and they didn't torture me. I know they would have, but I knew that they weren't going to torture me. I knew they would do other things, and they did them. I didn't get any letters. I got no packages. Everybody in the group got all those things, but that's fine. They shared with me, and they let me read their letters, but I would always harass them. I was the senior guy in our room, and we followed the rules. If a guard wanted somebody to do something and pointed to me, or if I was out with the SRO of the building, go talk to him. They did not like that. And sometimes they'd stop. That'd put the end of the discussion. They wouldn't have you do it. But that's the organization and maintaining our military code And we can go on about things that these guys had learned that were passed down to us on how we, as POWs, would respond. Not name, rank, and serial number and the silly things you see in the movies a lot, but reasonable things. So that's how I got through the experience.
Okay, Dr. Shields, it's now the end of 72, beginning of 73. The war was seemingly going to come to a close, and then it didn't. And the North Vietnamese reneged. Can you walk us through then until the moment that you knew that they were coming home?
Well, we were always uncertain about how things were going to go. We had come to know the North Vietnamese by that time, and we knew that no matter what they said, no matter what was going on in Paris, you could always have a snag. And in fact, there were snags down in the south. We had releases that came through Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines from Hanoi, and also from South Vietnam back to Clark Air Force Base, because there were men who had been held in, captured in South Vietnam, a lot of ground forces, and they came back the other way, and there was a snag there at the very end. You never knew what you're going to get with them. And I think that what brought the men home ultimately, we had a negotiated settlement. There was a peace accords that provide for the return, the release of the men. And as I said, we never got an official list of who was a real prisoner and who wasn't, who we were actually going to get, until January 27th, a couple of weeks before the first release. At that point in time, we didn't know where they were going to come. Men had been released in September of 1972 through Moscow and Sweden. So we had no idea whether we were going to be processing people in Europe or whether we were going to be doing it in Southeast Asia. We had a total of close to 1,600 men that we were concerned about, and we didn't know whether the prisoners were going to be 800 or 900. We think we had an idea, and as a matter of fact, as it turned out, our intelligence was very good. It was one of the very sad things for me that it was so good, because we were hoping that we were wrong and that we were going to receive far more men back than we did. But I think what brought them home, we knew peace was at hand, and then it wasn't at hand. North Vietnam, the North Vietnamese speak some French, some of them knew some English, obviously North Vietnamese, but I'll tell you another language that they understood, and that was the language of B-52 bombs and the language of mining of Haiphong Harbor. And when that happened, I think that they understood that this was over. And they as much as told us that going up to Hanoi for that release on February 12th. They were not very happy. They apologized for the condition of the airport and the airport lounge, saying, you know, you've got to sit on these lousy stools, and you can't do this and you can't do that because your bombs wrecked this place. Well, it didn't wreck anything. It was fine. It was like some of the places that I've been close to when I was growing up. They were trying to tell us that we'd been bombing civilian targets, which we hadn't. But that was a time when those bombers went north and when Haiphong Harbor was mined, that we knew that we had an agreement and men were going to come home.
I want to go, if I can, slightly out of order. If the video is ready, because this is the perfect timing for it. What you're about to hear is remarkable. You're going to hear a conversation with Dr. Shields and President Nixon. As recorded, there's going to be subtitles underneath because it's tough to hear it. The recording systems were not as good back then. But you're going to hear a 4-minute conversation of what happened. I believe this is in the Oval Office?
In the Oval Office, that's correct.
So I want to take you back in time, 40 years, to what they had to say together. Let's see if we can roll it.
Mr. President, I wish you could have been in Hanoi. When that first group, all of the groups were great, but to be there when that first bus came around the corner and see those men, I could have flown back to Clark without the use of the airplane. It was the greatest moment of my life. Well, we had gone into the terminal initially to talk with the North Vietnamese about the procedures that they wanted to use. And they were very cordial. Their procedures were, I think, nominal. They were acceptable to us. They said the men are around the corner in a I said, and you'll be with us in just a few minutes. And that C-141 was just about 40 yards away with the American flag on the tail. And the first man out off the bus was the senior officer for that bus. He was a Navy commander named Poww, and he was on crutches. Had a bad injury to his leg and leg had atrophy. And as soon as they got off that bus, he said, "Form up." And those men stood in line there, tall and proud and very dignified. And they said, "What should we do?" And I said, "I think you're supposed to go through this little gate here on this side of the square and out this side, and then you're ours." And they marched through there, and they didn't look to the right or to the left, but just heads held high. And as soon as Commander Bowden, the first one, went through the other side, he threw down his crutches and threw his arms around me. And he did this, "I'm home," and I said, "You sure are." And it was great. Just threw it away, and I walked him out to the ramp of that airplane. And it was unbelievable. You could see the dignity of those men, and Captain Denton on board the aircraft as we closed that tailgate. He said, "We wanted to come out in honor." He says, "If we succeeded," and I said, "You have succeeded." And that's what they wanted more than anything. Well, they expressed their support to you, Mr. President. Galen Kramer, an Air Force captain, on the bus had a sign tape on his jacket. I guess Galen Kramer was the one who pulled the little flag out and said, "God bless American President Nixon." And one of the other men had taped on his jacket, "God bless President Nixon." They knew of your efforts and the country's efforts. They were proud. They felt that they were ready to serve 20 more years there if needed.
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time either.
Did you guys see him? Did you know who he was at the time?
No.
No, but he was on the first plane when there were, what was it, 40 of us on that first plane, something like that?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
He was one of the civilians on the plane. I didn't notice him because, I was the first one up the ramp, and then followed by Bob Shoemaker, and then Hayden Lockhart and the others. We came out in order of shoot down. And then, to be honest with you, Dr. Shields, with all respects, but there were two Air Force nurses that had attracted more attention, and it wasn't until halfway we were back towards the Philippines that we noticed.
I wasn't going to say anything about that, Ev.
Yeah.
Well, in my conversation last night before the dinner, one of the men told me that he met his future wife on the Eastern Airlines flight back home, which is wonderful. Not so good for Eastern Airlines, but good for him. So, this celebration, you come back, before the cheering, when you step foot on American soil, what happened?
Well, I had never seen a C-141 before, and I'd been interested in aviation forever, but we were there a long time, and never saw a C-5 till we got to Clark Air Force Base. And we got to Clark, and they're being very careful with us. They weren't sure exactly what, but we couldn't get on the bus to go to the hospital till your escort showed up. They had an escort for each of us, and they told them it was like an aide de camp to help you out. We thought, because they thought we were going to be nuts, and they wanted somebody to control us. And I didn't have one, so everybody's on the bus, and come on, Galanti, come on. And pretty soon he comes running up and said, "Okay, we can go now." I said, "Where you been?" He said, "This air base is so screwed up. I just went over to the terminal and signed you up on the first manifest for the first airplane going back to the States. I thought that'd be more important." Then we went to the hospital. He walked me up to the front of every line at every clinic and said, "He's on the first airplane back. You mind if he goes ahead of you?" And I went digging right through as fast as the dickens. And You know, they're sort of fattening us up. They knew it was going to be over. As soon as the bombing started, Roger, when you guys did that, we knew we were probably the only Americans that were really confident we were going home because they were being fairly nice to us while the country, we knew they were getting hit hard. And so I got a little fat. Well, we exercised and we were in pretty good shape. I only weighed 120 pounds, and you can do a lot of push-ups when you're 120 pounds. So there I was. The doctor said, we're going to keep you on a bland diet because your system can't support all this rich stuff. So I jumped on my hands and did 25 vertical push-ups and went up, and this little fat Air Force doctor, Tom. And I went up to him and said, if you can do that, I'll eat a bland diet. If you can't do that, I'm eating a steak, ice cream. So he pulled out his prescription pad and sent me down to the chow hall, and I had a 16-ounce steak and a half-gallon of ice cream.
So it had been almost 6 years for you.
Yeah.
What happened at that moment?
First, you've all seen the pictures of us in the airplanes. When the wheels broke the ground and we were in the air, that was a big scream, and you can see our pictures. And then when we crossed the border over the water out of Hanoi or Haiphong and we were in the air, that was another big scream. And photographers captured a lot of that, and that expressed our thing. And then by this time they'd broken the ice with all the hand wringers. When we came home, the hand wringers are saying, oh, they can't be normal. We've got to give them a bland diet because they can't have a rich foods. But after they had the riots, so the POWs said, oh, we want steaks and greasy eggs and a beer if you got it. And so by the time I got to Clark, the ice had been broken and they had all the steaks and greasy eggs and ice cream that we could eat. And we knew we were home when we got good food and good treatment in Clark. They gave us 3 days in Clark where they fixed all our broken teeth. They had a bank full of dentists there replacing all our teeth that had been broken out in the beatings. And they had uniform tailors there. They gave us all clean tailors, or uniforms with the correct number of ribbons so that when we stepped off the airplane in the United States to you, and here I did in San Diego, when I stepped off that airplane, America said, welcome home, and I had a nice clean uniform, and my wife and kids were there to meet me.
Some of you were surprised at your rank insignia.
Yeah.
When you got that because you'd been promoted while you were in captivity.
Right.
So let me ask you one last question, and we're going to open it up to questions for you all. And I'm going to have a bias to either the veterans in this room or the young people in this room. That night at the White House, the biggest event, the most number of people that the White House had ever hosted. As you're seeing the men together, probably for the last time, and you're in the White House, celebrated by the President of the United States, what are you thinking at that moment?
Well, first of all, the two events that I remember that most Americans don't have the privilege or pleasure of experiencing. One of them was being a POW in a communist prison camp, and the second one was sitting in the White House having a dinner and being able to roam the White House. It was so overwhelming, first of all, to have all of us together. But I was in one of the next to the last aircraft back, so it was maybe 4 weeks for me before the White House. So I was still in awe of our reception home by the American people, particularly at Clark. I mean, it was all the signs and all the welcome home and all of it. So I was still somewhat flabbergasted at the welcoming. But the fact that the president thought that much, I mean, I knew that he thought things were important to bring us home, but I didn't realize the magnitude of it. And I've learned more actually this weekend of how sincere he was about having us at his house. That's a pretty phenomenal thing, and I'll never ever forget that. And this last night brought it all back. You know, it's just an event that I'll cherish forever, and I can't say any more than that. It was just phenomenal.
Sandy, I think it's time to turn it over for questions, but let me turn it back to you.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks to all of our participants. Now it's your turn to participate. So what I'm going to ask you to do is raise your hand, and I'll bring the mic to you. Do you have your hand up first? All right. And if you would stand and state your name and ask the question.
My name is Joe Urig, A-Force Forever. So my question is, have any of you been back to the Halo anonymously or announced, and what was your reaction when you were there?
Thank
you. I've been back 3 times. The first time I went back, it was to do a documentary, quote unquote, and it was before normalization with Vietnam. It was in 1992, and there were 6 of us that went back to the Hanoi Hilton and other camps that we could find. But I spent a week. I told the producers, I said, I'm not going to take more than a week off to go, on vacation, but to go Vietnam. If I want to take a vacation, I want to take my family to the Caribbean and relax and have fun. So he agreed. It was, to me, it was interesting because I anticipated that they would be there with propaganda, greet us with, here we are, look, seeking forgiveness or whatever. The other thing was that people were concerned that it was the first time back, it was going to be emotional. Did you have a doctor with you or a medical? And so I was concerned about what was going to happen in a way. In the end, it was sort of flat because when I landed, we landed in Hanoi and there was nobody. The ramp was bare. The terminal was bare. The only people there were the people, the logistics people, and that were going to help us with a documentary. This was before normalization. Nothing had changed. I mean, there were a million bicycles, people with conical hats, peasant garb, and so forth. As far as I was concerned, when I went to visit the Hanoi Hilton, this was before they tore it down. And they were filming, and I was thinking about why did I not react the way I'm supposed to react, start tearing up and getting all emotional, and I sat back finally and I thought about it, and then it hit me. Later on, I was a deputy of the Veterans Administration, and when we were doing that around the country, we put in these veteran counseling centers for Vietnam veterans, and one of the biggest attractions was the rap session where the guys would sit around and talk to each other what happened. We had rap sessions every day. We had rap sessions on that wall, and every time we'd go to quiz, we'd come back, interrogations, we passed everything. We held nothing within. After we were broken, we came back from it, you passed it on. You felt like the lowest piece of human species in the world because you gave in, and then we kept each other. They lift our spirits, we'd lift their spirits, but we had these rap sessions, and it hit me. When we finally came out, we left those ghosts back there. And I think you could say that as a group, we were pretty optimistic about it. But that was my experience of going back the first time.
All right, good. Next question.
Hi, my name is Steve Vartanian. I live here in Yorba Linda. I stand in honor for my dad, who was in the Korean War in the Army, and he had surgery, so he couldn't be here to welcome you gentlemen home. I remember as a boy, my dad would watch the media every night. He'd come home from work. Any information we could get on all the soldiers and sailors and POWs. I remember as a boy, when you all were being released, I was probably about 14, 15 years old. Some of you were forced to sign something. And I was wondering if that was a document. Obviously, it looked like in the media that was for you to be released. And I was wondering if you were forced to sign something. Secondly, I have 2 little boys, and we're trying to buy their bedroom set, and there's products made in Vietnam, and I won't buy it. And I want to know what your thoughts are on that. Am I just way off base, or am I reflecting, a good attitude?
Anyone? Good.
Well, the first part, I think everybody was forced to sign something. The punishment was, if you got caught trying to communicate with another American was 30 days locked in leg irons with your hands handcuffed behind your back. And that was miserable. The first time I had to do that, it took me 6 months to recover from it. It's just, there's a whole lot of biological functions you have to do that are very difficult to do when you're handcuffed. And it was just miserable and whatever. But we got through it. It was not a big deal. But the best thing was, I thought the first time they broke me, I thought I was the only one that did it. And I just knew I was the biggest traitor in history of the United States of America until I bumped into Colonel Reisner then and happened to go to the Hanoi March. But 1 week after I arrived in Hanoi, handcuffed to this great hero who had been on the cover of Time magazine just a few months before. And he told me the whole story. And just I got the word from him. He was the senior officer then in the whole POW system. He said, tolerate torture to the point of permanent physical disability. If you break, bounce back and do it again next time. But we've all been broken. I thought, God, the biggest relief I think I've ever had in my life, other than surviving my first night carrier landing, was that thing being tapped to me. I knew what he looked like because I saw him on the cover of Time magazine, but I was blindfolded, he was blindfolded, and we were riding somewhere, I thought to get shot in the back of this Jeep at night. And so that was, everybody did break. Second part of your question about the boys, somebody else take that, I don't remember what it was.
How many of you, by show of hands, will buy products that are made in Vietnam today? Raise your hands.
Oh, well.
Okay, so it's unanimous.
Next question.
Yes, my name is Leonard Fortier. I'd be interested in knowing how you dissolve the hatred, if you will, or the intense dislike that you experienced through those months and years. Did it go away suddenly? Did it take time? And is it still persistent?
Distaste for what?
Your feelings toward the towards the North Vietnamese for the treatment that you received.
I'll handle that. Like I say, I was average. We all hurt. I gave that up as soon as I left Hanoi. I said, well, there's more important things to think of, like my wife and my family and my kids and my country and flying airplanes and getting on an aircraft carrier again. So we put that all behind us, and I've been back 3 times as a tourist, found all my prison camps, took my wife back, took my kids back. The Vietnamese are grateful hosts. I mean, they're wonderful hosts, clean country. You don't get sick or diarrhea, and they're wonderful hosts, and it's a beautiful country. United Airlines flies right in their first class right to Hanoi, and it's a beautiful tourist country and beautiful people. So the animosity and hard feelings have been gone for 40 years. So I can't answer it any better than that I don't have a hard feeling.
I can add a bit to that. Is because the whole time we were there, we knew we were coming home, and we used to tell each other, we're going to come home. These poor people have to stay here. And so, and that was it. But it was mostly a peasant population, and as far as our treatment goes, they were ordered to treat us harshly by the camp authorities, and when they treated us nicely, it was because they were ordered to treat us nice, and it was just, that's a totalitarian form of government. As far as the people, I separate the people, especially, and a good example are the refugees who came here and built lives here, and look what they've done. So.
I'll add one word to it. I'll add
Thank
one
you.
word, it's attitude. And it's the same today as then.
Next
Yes,
question.
Positive attitude, yes.
Next question.
Good morning. My name is Bill Mallett, former staff sergeant in the Air Force during the Korean War. I'd like to know if any of you were involved in the making of the Dermesi flag, and whether you were or you weren't, could you tell us how it was used in the Hanoi Hilton?
The making of the what, sir?
The Dermesi flag.
Flag. He was one individual that made a flag. It was that was done out of a piece of old pajamas that we wore, and then he was able to stitch together the red, white, and blue colors, and I don't recall exactly how he did it, but the flag was about that big. He was one. There was another fellow named Mike Christian, who also had made a flag, And of course, it was against the camp regulations to do things like that. So when the guards found his flag, they took it away, and he was punished in a manner somewhat like Paul just said. But he didn't deter Mike. He turned around and made another flag. And so Mike Christian is no longer with us today. He passed away some years ago. But there were several who did built flags or made flags and things of that nature.
I made a flag, but unfortunately we couldn't bring it back. And I didn't get beat when they found it. But I made a 3 foot by 2 feet flag out of dead mosquitoes because I'm a mosquito magnet, and I needed a project. And I was in the back of the room, so it was real easy for me to make a mosquito flag. I didn't tell my roommates. They were trying to figure out what in the world is this guy doing on putting all these dots on. And I might ask any of you, go home today, as this is a homework assignment. Without looking at a flag, try to draw that flag and put everything in the right perspective. It's not an easy thing, believe me. You think you look at that flag all the time, but boy, when it comes time to, is that when, how many, what? I had a practice thing, I'd put it on my cup too, and I wish I'd have brought that cup with me, but they let me bring it home. They never found that flag on that cup for some reason. It was aluminum, it was kind of dull, but they found it, painted it all up, did not beat me, but I started over in about 2 days because I still had time, and unfortunately it was towards the winter and the mosquitoes weren't quite as prolific in the winter, but I had half my flag finished, but it was a good project.
Next question.
Hi there, I'm Brian Robertson. I just had a quick question for you. I've read some documents that suggest that the Soviets and North Vietnamese utilized Cuban interrogators. I was wondering if maybe you guys could expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, the Cuban came in around July of 1967 to the camp that I was in at the time called the Zoo. And there were 2 of them. I was one of the first that they interrogated, and right away I knew there was something besides being Caucasians. There was something much different about these guys. And then, for some reason, they didn't take me into their program. Maybe it's because I had a lot of publicity when I was shot down, what have you. But then they started interrogating others, and they included these people in their program. So they took part of the camp, and the Cubans ran the camp. There were about 12, I believe, of American POWs who were brutally treated by the Cubans because we couldn't figure out why they were there, but we guessed that perhaps they had different ways of treating POWs to get them to cooperate, what have you. But as a result of that, after they had actually killed a couple of our guys in that 1 year while they were there, they left a year later, and it was a very interesting, I'd say, pilot test of how to run a camp. We never got the full story. When we got back, intelligence people had, through photographs, we tried to identify who they were. We finally helped the department identify these people. The one senior fellow that was the senior of the 2, we had called him Fidel, and the other one, I don't remember his name, but it was that was a 1-year experience with the Cuban.
We still don't know a lot about who they were and what they were doing. It's still a kind of a black hole for us. How they came in and where they came from and what their training was been. We don't know today.
All right, we have time for one more.
Frank Sharkany, U.S. Air Force, 71 to 94. What information did you get after the Sante raid? Did it affect the way you were treated? And what are your feelings on that for those of you that were there at that time?
Yeah, I was in Sante. We had got moved about 6 weeks or 7 weeks before the raid. We think because of an imminent flood. There was a creek that ran right next to the camp, and later the clouds, July 14th, 1970, was a very clear day, and one of these little drones went over the camp. It's a little reconnaissance drone, American, taking pictures. I've seen the photo they took, and I'm up there down on the ground pointing up at this thing as it's flying by. And a very clear picture and everything like that. Well, that was, we think, the precursor to the Sante raid. They took those pictures. The monsoon came in. There were a lot of clouds, and they didn't want to fly drones over the camp too soon to the raid. So we were evacuated that night after that picture was taken. And we're not sure whether Uncle Sam knew about it or whatever. But they'd moved us to a camp 5 miles east of Sante, close enough that when the raid happened, we heard it. We heard the machine gun fire and the AAA, and SAM's going off for the first time in years because peace talks had been going on. And so we weren't sure what was happening, but it was from the direction of Sante, so we figured that's what, there's something going on there. Well, the Sante Raiders went back that night having fun made of them from the Washington Post and the New York Times. And a typical fiasco, military screw up, you know, there they go, they went in. They didn't lose anybody on the raid. They left a helicopter behind, which was pre-planned, and but everybody else got out okay. And they went back thinking they'd failed. What happened was the best thing that happened to us the entire time we were in captivity, because the North Vietnamese panicked and emptied all these outlying camps all over with these little cells and guys in solitary confinement or 2 to a 7x7 room, and moved us all into Hanoi. The big camp that's when Wallow became the Hanoi Hilton, I think, because I was in a room initially with 58 people and it went down to 48 after they shuffled things out, but big rooms, and we were teaching classes, and the guys that we'd communicated with for years, best of friends, except we didn't know what they looked like. And all of a sudden we're in the same room with these guys. I go up there and say, hey, what's your name? Oh, yeah, hey, yeah, Galanti, yeah, how's your wife doing? Yeah, blah, blah. We knew everything about everybody in that camp except what they looked like. Got together, it was the greatest thing. So the Sante raid didn't get anybody out, but it was probably the best thing that happened to us morale-wise, besides being released.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. And I want to particularly thank Frank Luntz for doing a great job as moderator, and I'd like him to... And I'm going to ask him to conclude with his perspectives on the panel. Frank?
Well, I've been thinking for the last hour and a half what I would say. And when I began to meet you yesterday, I could not look you straight in the eye without this nervousness. And I listened to the stories of survival and the way that you communicate them and your incredible sense of humor, which I cannot comprehend, but I appreciate. And some might say that this is about human strength and endurance, but I don't think so. To listen to these men, I think this is truly and deeply about the American experience and the American pride and those values that we are taught from when we are children. The willingness to defend those things that we do not believe in, but our willingness to give our lives for it. Our commitment to our families and our communities, and our belief in a better future, which is truly the definition of the American dream, that we will give our children something better than we gave ourselves. I urge all of the young people here to come, I'm sorry to do this, to come shake their hands, because you will shake the hands of a true American hero. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
For them, this is for you. This is for you.
What an honor to have you here.
Let me...
You're one of my favorite actors. Thank you. You're doing us a service by being a great actor. Everybody serves their own.
Let me mention two things. One, we have a panel called an All-American Homecoming, an exhibit, a special exhibit that we have on display in the galleries. It'll be up all summer. I hope all of you will look at it. I am humbled because I know the great work as president of the Richard Nixon Foundation that the 37th president did to diligently, patiently demand from the North Vietnamese that they come to the peace table and that they bring these fellows home safely. So thank you, President Nixon. I am never going to complain about salty popcorn in the theater. I'm never going to complain in the dentist chair. I'm never going to be impatient with slow service in a restaurant. I'm going to thank God for all of my blessings after I hear their experiences. Thank you all for coming.